Welcome to Uncolored. I'm Kevin Metcalf. Thanks for tuning in again. We're going to go back to something that we've done before, and we're going to get back to Dr. Rasmussen's book, How Reason Can Lead to God. The reason I want to get back to the book is because what we're talking about are ideas. And the whole goal, not the whole goal, but one of the goals of the channel is I think that there are some good ideas and bad ideas out there. And I think there's a way that you could, just by hearing the ideas or the way that they're presented to you, tell if they're good ideas or bad ideas. And all these ideas are coming from all over the place. School, work, politics, TV, wherever you're talking about. Friends, family, somebody's spewing some idea about how the world's supposed to be. And I would imagine more often than not, it's not very good. A not very good picture of the way the world really is. And so I'm wondering if there's a way that you can tell, where you can figure out, this idea is good, that idea is terrible, I'm going to get out of here. But this idea is so good, I might want to make this part of my worldview. That's really what it comes down to. How are we going to create a way to look at the world through a window that is an accurate representation of the way the world is? And I think there's a way to do it. I've showed you this before. This is from a book by a guy named Stuart Hackett, The Resurrection of Theism. He's a philosopher who has this idea here, and I think it's a very sound idea. He says, if a statement about the real world is self-contradictory, it is false. And this not merely in the sense that the statement is internally absurd, but also in the sense that it's a false account of the real world itself. So the idea that Hackett seems to be doing is he's drawing a boundary around what is possibly a real thing, and those things that are just not even possible to be real. And the line that he draws is logic and reason, basically speaking. If you have ideas that are self-contradictory, if people are holding ideas that if this is true, then this can't be true, but they want to hold on to both of these ideas, you can safely say that's not even a real thing, and there's something wrong with the way that person's understanding reality. He goes on to say this is why, and it's important to understand why. For if we assert that a self-contradiction is true, then we're rejecting a principle upon which the possibility of any assertion at all rests. Namely, a thing cannot both be and not be at the same time and in the same manner. If this principle is false, no knowledge is possible, not even the knowledge that a contradiction is true. As well, in that case, to be a rational amount of dirt as a thinking man. Now, I would add to that, not just contradictions, but I would add things like fallacious arguments, ignoring data sets, relevant data sets to the topic. Oftentimes, for people to hold an idea that they want to hold, even though it's absurd, what they'll do is just ignore whole sets of data that show that their idea is wrong. And I think all of those things are bad ideas to do. Here's how I look at this idea. I need a dumb way to understand it. So the way I look at it is this. If you like sports or competition, whether it's, football, basketball, or even those, what do they got, the online, computer leagues and things like that, there's this competition system. And basically you have is either the preliminary rounds, or in football or basketball, you have the regular season. Then you have a postseason. And the whole idea of this whole thing is to sort out the teams that are really, really good and could compete for the championship, and all of those teams that are really, really bad and have absolutely no chance at a championship. That's really what that's about. And I think that what Hackett's idea does the same thing. What it says is any idea that's full of contradictions, it doesn't deal with the relevant data sets, if it doesn't match what our experience is and what the data says, then you can throw it out in the regular season. You don't have to consider this thing as a really good idea. And we've seen some of that in some of the things that we've already talked about. I won't even get into it. You can look at the videos that I've done. But the point is this. This idea makes it really simple, or at least easier, to sift between ideas that are good and that are bad if you care. Because a lot of people just don't. Some people just want to be part of a group, and whatever those ideas that group holds, they're going to hold those ideas, and they really don't care if they match reality or not. I'm just talking to those folks out there who want to understand the world the way it actually is, and not just by some group of people that you want to be associated with. which unfortunately too many of us do. So that's how I look at it. Logic and reason, the regular season of ideas. If you can make it through the regular season, then we can consider the idea as possibly a really, really good idea. If not, don't even worry about it. They can go back, retool, come back next season. Maybe they can come back and work on some of the weaknesses, and then maybe we can consider it in the postseason. But so far as it has those contradictions and it refuses to deal with those contradictions, for me, I leave those ideas alone. So let's see how Dr. Rasmussen does this in his book, How Reason Can Lead to God. The reason why I picked out this book is because Dr. Rasmussen has a fantastic way of taking concepts and ideas and boiling them down into something that makes sense and that are pretty easy to grasp even for dummies like me. That's why I appreciate the work that he does. There's a lot of folks out there are like that, or I'm sure there are many people who are like that, but Dr. Rasmussen is one of the first people who sort of captured my attention, and especially with this book, because what he's dealing with here, basically, it seems to me, is a cosmological argument. And a cosmological argument is a theistic argument that uses things in reality, the cosmos, to analyze and look at the data in the cosmos and see how they relate to the existence of God. That's really what those arguments do. And this is a version of the cosmological argument, and I don't know if it's a Leibnizian argument or if it's one of the Kalam arguments. I'm not sure which one it is, if it's any of them at all, really. But this seems to be a cosmological type of an argument. So let's look at what he says, and we're going to look at his idea, and then we're going to see how it goes through the regular season of logical challenges to this idea. So we're going to start in chapter 3, right here at the beginning, where he does, just basically starts with a summary of the idea. It says, consider the puzzle again. We observe by reason that reality is, as a whole, the blob of everything includes everything. Therefore, nothing exists beyond the total blob, and nothing beyond the blob of everything could have caused or explained its existence. In this sense, our reality is self-sufficient, i.e., it has no outside cause or explanation, and that's strange. How can anything of any size, shape, or number be self-sufficient? So he draws the picture, the big blob of everything, and there's nothing outside of it. So the question is why is it here? Why does it continue to stay here and not just pop out of existence? Or however it got here, why doesn't it just leave? What is it that makes everything here and nothing not here? That's a bad way to say it, but that you get you get what I'm saying. Now, Dr. Rasmussen at this point is going to go on and talk about necessary existence. He's going to talk about diffuse properties that can be transferred from parts to wholes. It'll also talk about dependence and independence and necessary existence. And I cannot encourage you enough to get the book and read it for yourself, because it's fascinating. If you like these kinds of arguments, and you're not one of these sophisticated guys who already understands it, if you're kind of just a lay person like me, a knucklehead, but these things interest you, there's no better book than this, because the way Dr. Rasmussen explains it really lays it out so you can get it inside your brain. But just for time's sake, we're going to move on, because what I want to show you is how he deals with challenges to the argument. So the idea is he's got this blob of everything, and according to Dr. Rasmussen, his idea is that somewhere in this blob of everything is something that has self-sufficiency, independence. It exists by its own nature. Its nature is to exist. And everything else is dependent upon this foundational layer. That's the idea. So let's see how he gets into the regular season. We're going to skip ahead a few pages. So in chapter 4, he begins to look at some of the challenges. This is the regular season that I mentioned earlier in this little thing I'm doing. He says, so far, we've put into place a foundation for our bridge. In this chapter, we will further examine this foundational structure. I will use 9 tests that probe and push upon the foundational materials. These tests come from questions, comments, and objections I've encountered over the last 20 years in journal articles, books, academic halls, and the internet. Then toward the end of this chapter, I will install a 21st century invention that will provide an additional independent reinforcement of the entire structure of our bridge. My aim is to provide a better sense of the integrity of the nature of the bridge. So here's what he's saying. He's going, look, this is my idea, okay? And over the past 20 years, there have been all of these objections, and I'm picking 9 of these. This is going to be my regular season. And I'm going to show you how I can whoop each of these teams that think they can challenge my idea. That's what he's doing. The reason why this is important is because ideas seem to have, well, they have many different aspects to them. But the first aspect is the idea itself and what makes the idea, all of the things. And that's the first 3 chapters where Dr. Rasmussen is building that bridge. But the second part of it, and I think is the most important part of it, is how it deals with challenges. How does it map the real world? And if some of these objections, or all of them, seem to question the credibility of some of his arguments, question the integrity of this bridge that he built, well, Dr. Rasmussen has to go back to square one and start trying to build it again. Or he may have to cast away this bridge altogether because it just simply doesn't meet the challenges of mapping onto reality. Maybe it misses whole data sets that it doesn't account for. Maybe there are logical or internal contradictions to his idea. But you won't know that until you test the ideas. And unfortunately, in a society, well, like anybody's society, probably since the beginning of time, this is the part that people don't want to do. People don't want to have conversations. They don't want to have information. They don't want to read anything that could possibly contradict their ideas or the way they see the world. Because they're afraid that if it does have contradictions, or if it doesn't include data sets, or if there's whole data sets that says this idea isn't true, guess what you got to do? You got to go back to square one. You have to rebuild your worldview, or you can no longer be part of this group that you so much want to be a part of. I think that's one of at least a couple of the reasons why people are so resistant towards examining their own ideas and seeing what problems there may be, and then taking on the challenge to try and make those ideas better, or cast them away altogether for ideas that take care of all of the data. So let's look at the challenges that Dr. Rasmussen deals with in the book. Okay. Objection 1, infinite regress. Now, the infinite regress objection is the idea that if you say that this thing caused this thing, then the question was, well, what caused this thing? And then if you figure out what causes that thing, then you go on and on and on. Infinitely. And then that means you really don't have an explanation for anything if you can't explain what started the whole thing. And so theistic arguments like the cosmological arguments, what they tend to do is they make this causal chain finite, ending in God. The Leibnizian argument does that, and also the Kalam cosmological argument. Both of them end saying that God is the start of all of these things. So that's going to be part of this first challenge. So here's the objection. The argument for the foundation theory assumes, without justification, that the chain of causes and effects must be finite. But suppose instead the chain is infinite. Each state of the universe is like a domino that was knocked into existence by a prior state. Then each state is actualized by another state. And there's no ultimate foundation. So basically the objection is what if there is no finite beginning, no unmoved mover, and things go on into infinity? Well, there's a number of arguments against that. Dr. Craig has a bunch of arguments that he uses for the infinitude, or for the finitude of the past, basically arguing that it's impossible or logically impossible for an infinite series of events to occur in time and space. But there are other arguments too. But that's not what Dr. Rasmussen uses. And this was a very, I thought, brilliant, but it's a very interesting way that he deals with this argument. So the reply is, actually, I do not assume that the chain of causes must be finite. The infinite regress objection, though common, does not actually touch the bridge of reason I have been constructing. The principles in Yeah, the principles in my construction have nothing at all to do with the length of history or the size of reality. Maybe reality is infinitely old. Maybe it's finite. Maybe there is one universe. Maybe there is a multiverse. No matter the size or age, we can ask how any reality of any length or size could exist. My argument is that without a foundation, there would be nothing, ever. The foundation is not something that comes before the chain of cause. Rather, the foundation is the ultimate basis of everything across all time. So he gives an example, and this is a pretty good example. He says, you wake up in a strange place. The first thing you notice is a domino fall over. You wonder how that happened. You then see that this flat domino lies at the end of a chain of other flat dominoes. As it turns out, this chain has no beginning. There are now infinitely many dominoes lying along an infinite floor. Each domino has been knocked down by the one next to it. The end. That's the story. Dr. Rasmussen says, in this story, we can explain why each domino lies flat, another domino knocked it over. Yet, there remains a deeper question about how these dominoes lie anywhere. What holds them up? Well, that story has an answer. The floor. The floor acts as a foundation for the locations of the dominoes. It says, the floor supports the dominoes while they're knocking each other over. I'm sorry, knocking each other. The floor is not some first domino that got the rest of the dominoes started. Rather, the floor supports the dominoes at each moment. It's funny because I think, and again, I am not up on all these arguments. I don't understand them as well as I might pretend to. But I think that steals a little bit from a Thomistic argument, a cosmological argument about not only how does everything begin, but how does everything remain in existence? Something has to keep everything existing rather than it just popping out of existence. And I think that's a little bit of what Dr. Rasmussen is getting at. But the whole point is, whether there's an infinite number of worlds or an infinite number of events, it still doesn't matter because that is part of the blob of everything. And there's nothing outside of that. And so the question still remains, why is that infinite thing there? That's the question. And I thought that's a brilliant way to answer it. So the next argument will be, let me see, the fallacy of composition. So the fallacy of composition is this idea that because a part of something has these qualities, then the whole that it makes up doesn't have all of the same qualities. In other words, all of the qualities from the part doesn't transfer to the whole necessarily. And to think that that does commits that composition fallacy. It's like saying, I think the one that I've heard is that, if part of the elephant weighs, half a pound, then the whole elephant together weighs half a pound. And that's obviously not true. So let's look at how Dr. Rasmussen deals with this. Well, let's first hear the objection, because I may not have gotten it right. And then we'll hear Dr. Rasmussen's reply. So the fallacy of composition, the objection. The academic halls and some of the corners of the internet, you might hear this complaint about cosmological arguments, arguments for an ultimate cause. They commit the fallacy of composition. To illustrate this fallacy, consider the following argument. Each section of the universe has a cause. Therefore, the entire universe has a cause. The problem here is that this argument is not valid because its conclusion, 2, does not fails to follow from 1. The underlying problem is that the argument implicitly relies on the following fallacious inference from parts to whole. Whatever is true of the part is true of the whole. It is this inference that tempts people to think that if each part of the universe has a cause, then so does the whole universe. The objection goes on to say, yet the principle from parts to whole is false. It is false that whatever is true of the part is automatically also true of the whole. For example, it's true of the atoms in your hand. It is true of the atoms in your hand, yet they are atoms. But it is not also true that your whole hand is an atom. Similarly, the parts of a sandwich are not themselves sandwiches. In general, the parts can be different from the whole they compose. For this reason, arguments that rely on parts to whole principles are fallacious. They commit the fallacy of composition. They assume that the whole has all the same parts as its properties. Therefore, it's a fallacy to assume that the whole of the universe has a cause from the observation that parts of the universe have a cause. So there's the objection. And the reply is this. This objection, though instructive, does not actually touch any part of our bridge. I did not take the parts to whole principles in hand when I constructed the beams. Instead, I used other principles. For example, I used the principles of dependence, according to which dependence flows from parts to whole. It's also fallacious to assume that all wholes have all the properties of their parts. It is not fallacious to infer that certain wholes have certain properties of their parts. Some properties are indeed whole inherited, and they flow from parts to wholes. To get the understanding of that, back in chapter 3, he talks about diffuse properties, properties that necessarily flow from parts to wholes. For example, color, texture, those kinds of things. So while it's right, each part of a sandwich is in itself a sandwich. If you lay down a tile, and all the tiles are the same color, then the whole floor will inherit that color. You can't get a different colored floor if all of the tiles are one color. That's the idea of a diffuse property. But look into chapter 3 for that. So Dr. Rasmussen goes on. Where did he go? Oh, it says, for example, whiteness, marble and glassiness flow from parts to whole. Thus, it's not fallacious to infer that a floor composed of white tiles is itself white, or that a stack of marble is itself marble. Similarly, it's not fallacious to infer that dependent things come from a dependent totality, form a dependent totality. These inferences track everything we know in experience. Moreover, the fallacy of composition actually highlights the strength of the beams in our bridge. This is the bridge of reason that Rasmussen is constructing. The fallacy of composition highlights the constraints on construction. Consider the following argument. Each section of reality has an outside cause. Therefore, the entirety of reality has an outside cause. This argument is worse than fallacious. It's contradictory. For as we saw in chapter 2, no cause can be outside all causes. To construct reality, when we need an unconstructed foundation, to construct reality then, we need an unconstructed foundation. Otherwise, we commit a construction error. The idea that he's getting at there is the idea that he started it with, is that if you have the blob of everything, it cannot have an outside cause because there's nothing outside of everything. And so whatever the cause of this blob has to be part of the everything. There cannot be an outside cause, even though everything within the blob has an outside cause. So there, the construction that parts to whole fallacy shows the strength of Dr. Rasmussen's argument. I think that's what he's pointing out there. So the next part is an objection about virtual particles. That's a little bit complicated and not necessarily one of the best objections that I've saw, but it's good. Uncaused events is another objection that he will go to. Let me see, what was the other one? And also uncaused laws. And so the other examples, continue to get a little bit more complex, but I just wanted to show you those first two. The infinite regress challenge and also the composition challenge. Those were pretty simple to understand. But all I'm showing is this. The only point I'm really making is whether you agree with the arguments or the replies or not. I'm simply saying that if you have an idea and you think your idea is right, that's not enough. And it's not enough that the people who like you and are in your circle or in your club or in your association, that they all agree with you. That's not good enough. You have to find people who disagree with you and let them challenge your argument. Let them tug at it and let them pull at it and let them see if there are some problems with it. That's how you know if you have a good argument or not. Unfortunately, what people like to do is we like to stay in our own little circles and just keep hearing the same things that we already believe. And the challenges that are clear to the ideas that we have go totally unnoticed because we've already become dogmatic. We've dug our feet in And anything that doesn't sound like what we already believe is automatically wrong because we don't believe it, which is insane. It's a dumb way to go. But your college professors do this, politicians, TV people, your friends, family. It's so common out there for people to be stuck inside ideas that are obviously wrong, just objectively speaking. But you don't want to look at the challenges to that data. Nobody wants to go through the regular season, yet they want to be crowned champion. And that's just not how the real world works. So that was just an example using Dr. Rasmussen's book, How Reason Can Lead to God, showing you how, one, you construct a really good idea, but once you construct that idea, you have to take it through the challenge of logic and reason. And if you don't do that, then everybody can safely ignore your idea because it probably isn't a very good one. Or actually, I guess it could be if you never have it challenged. But I guess what I'm saying is you'd never know. The only way to really know if it's a good idea is to hold it up to scrutiny, look at all of the data, and let people who disagree with you have a shot at it. Now you know who the best is. That's how that works. All right. Thank you again for your support. I really appreciate those who are supporting the channel. The numbers seem to increase far beyond what I expected, which, you know, I mean, that's fantastic. And I love that you're doing it. And hopefully this is helping folks out there, which is why I continue to do is hopefully there's somebody out there that this might benefit. Next week, we're going to do something different. And I apologize for the hiatus. I got a little bit of construction going on over here. But we're going to look at more ideas. And look at the strength of these ideas and test it. If you think I'm missing something or if there's something else that I need to be looking at, always let me know. I'm more than happy to hear that. But otherwise, get Dr. Rasmussen's book. Fantastic book, How Reason Can Lead to God. It's a great book if you want to learn. It's kind of a nice foundation for cosmological arguments because he takes, maybe it's just because I'm new to this, but he takes a couple of interesting turns or twists at this idea that I think are fabulous. They really get you thinking differently than what I had thought about before. Of course, it's only been a few years, but you know, and that's what you want to do. You want to have people challenge your ideas, make you think about other things, make your ideas bigger and better because you're looking at other ideas. And now I'm just rambling. All right. Thank you very much. Get out of here. That's enough of me.